my name's Alicia, and welcome to my channel, Bookish Lish. I have been wanting to start a booktube channel for a while now, and I'm just getting around to doing it. So this is going to be my first video, and I'm going to talk about school books and how I've enjoyed them for the past year, and how they've been good and bad, and what are kind of the pros and cons of reading books in school. And I hope you enjoy it, and thanks for watching. The first book I'm going to be talking about is To Kill a Mockingbird by Harp. I read this book as a summer read last year, and I'd been wanting to read it for a while, but I hadn't really gotten around to picking it up. And then it was on my summer reading list for school, so I kind of had to read it, and I really enjoyed it. I was actually very surprised by how much I enjoyed this book. I think it deserves the Pulitzer Prize. I think that it's a great book, and I think everyone should read this book one time in their lifetime because it was very influential, and it gave me a very different perspective on how to look at society and how everything works. The second book was A Raisin in the Sun by Lorraine Hansberry. This is a play, and it was okay. It was also on my summer reading list last year for 9th grade, and it was okay. I understood the story, and I understood kind of what was going on, but I didn't understand necessarily how huge of a deal it was, and it was kind of hard to get some of the symbolism out of this book. If you like plays, maybe it was because it was the first play I read that I didn't like it as much, but if you like plays, maybe you would enjoy reading this. It was very interesting. Both of these books deal with racism, which was part of why we had to read them, I guess. It was kind of a running theme. If you're interested in that kind of topic, I would definitely recommend these two books. The next book I'm going to talk about that I don't have with me is Their Eyes Were Watching God, which also kind of went with the race thing. I'm not sure who it's by, but if you look it up on Goodreads or something, I'm sure you'll be able to find it. It was interesting. Most of it's written in dialect, so it's a little bit harder to understand. That one was a lot easier to figure out what was going on and what the themes were and what the symbolism was, and I had a lot of fun actually reading that book. A lot of people didn't like it in my class, but I like to be open to new things, and I definitely wouldn't have picked that book up beforehand, so it was interesting reading it and seeing kind of a different perspective on how things work. Up next is The House on Mango Street, which I also don't have in my possession because I haven't bought it yet. We read this right before Christmas break, and we actually didn't get to discuss it much in class, which I was kind of sad about because it was a really good book. It's almost like short stories, but it's not short stories. It's kind of interesting almost. It's like little snippets of this girl's life, Esperanza, and it was a cool book. I enjoyed it. It made me feel like I was at home. That's what I loved about this book so much. I could read it anywhere and I would feel like I would be at home, which was a really great feeling. And I'm really sad that we didn't actually get to discuss this book more because I really enjoyed it. And I would definitely recommend this book to everyone, even if you don't have to read it for school, because it was a really good book. Definitely read it. Up next is another book that people have a lot of conflicting feelings about, and that is Frankenstein, which I also don't have. I don't have most of these books. I loved this book. I thought it was awesome. I thought it was dark, and it was creepy, and it was so much fun to read. And a lot of people in my class didn't like it because most of the reason I just named, that it was dark and it was creepy and it was written in 18th century language and it was a little bit hard to understand at times, but I really enjoyed it. I thought it was very interesting to read, and I thought it was very captivating. I think that Frankenstein is another A+ book that I had to read for school. A lot of people think that school reading is going to be boring and dry, but if you go into it with the mindset that it's going to be interesting and fun and new, that you're going to read stuff that you wouldn't normally read, that's when school reading really starts to make sense. And Frankenstein, I think, is one of those books that a lot of people don't understand why we read it for school, even though it is like science fiction and the first science fiction book. But I not only found the book interesting to read, but I found it interesting to learn about Mary Shelley, and I thought it was interesting to learn about who the characters are based off of and how the story originated, almost as much as I enjoyed the book. So I would definitely look into different things about Frankenstein and try learning a bit more about it before you read it, and hopefully it'll make a bit more sense for you. The next thing we read, which we actually read aloud in class instead of reading at home because it's kind of hard to understand for some people is Julius Caesar by William Shakespeare. This was so much fun to read in class. Honestly, don't read Shakespeare at first if you don't read it with other people or in class, because it is hard to understand even in class with somebody explaining it to you. But once you get it, it's fun. It's entertaining. It's funny. There's a lot of jokes in these plays. Definitely read Shakespeare with somebody else or read it aloud. Don't try and read it on your own. I have learned that the hard way. It's a lot easier to understand if you read it with other people first. The last book I read in class last year was Life of Pi by Jan Martel. I'd been wanting to read this book since the movie came out, and after I heard that we were going to be reading it in class, even though it was the end of the year, I asked for it for Christmas. I was that stoked to read this book, and I'm really glad that I ended up getting it because I'm going to reread this. It was that good. Read this book. It's a very interesting topic because it deals a lot with like religion and beliefs and how you look at the world, but it was actually really awesome for me because I don't have a very common religion, and seeing how people reacted to the different beliefs of his was very cool to see, and how his faith helped him through his hardships. And I loved this book. I don't care what interest you have in, read this book. It was so good. The last two books I have for you today were actually my summer reading, and the first one I'm going to talk about is Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. Unfortunately, I didn't enjoy this book because I was hoping I was going to. I was really stoked to read it, and I was really hoping it was going to be good, but unfortunately it was a big letdown for me. This was the first book besides Raisin in the Sun that I haven't really liked to read for school, unfortunately. And, I mean, it wasn't just the subject that I didn't like, it was hard to understand the motives and the reasons the characters were doing the things that they were, which was kind of sad because I've heard a lot of good things about this book being a good dystopian novel, but unfortunately I just didn't get that vibe from it. It was hard for me to get into, for one, and I also didn't understand why he's met this 17-year-old on the street, first chapter of the book, named Clarice, and she somehow inspires him to go for the gun. The last book I'm going to talk about, which I'm actually about 100 pages left from finishing, is Davita's Harp by Chaim Potok. This book is set post-World War I America, almost on the verge of World War II. This is a really good book so far. It's a bit slow through the first half because it's dealing with the main character's life, and the main character is only about 8 or 9 throughout the entirety of this book, but her parents are both communists, and it's really interesting to have a different viewpoint, and it's also interesting to see how her Jewish family and how her Jewish heritage is treated in this book. Even though she lives in America, it's interesting to see the different viewpoint of an American during that time instead of a European, and even a young child, and see how the Jews even were treated in America rather than Europe, because we all know how they were treated in Europe during that time. It was horrible, but it's interesting to see how they were treated even before the war started. That's all I have for everyone today. Thank you for watching my first video. I hope I can get another one up soon sometime. Thank you for watching. Bye!